From the nation's capital, Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. A weekly discussion about the federal issues most important to Nevada. And now, from Washington, D.C., here's Marilee Joyce.
And good day to you. I'm Marilee Joyce, and this is Eye on Washington. It's the only statewide Nevada news program produced in Washington, D.C. Every week, Eye on Washington takes you straight to Capitol Hill for a discussion with Nevada's delegation and other leaders about the federal matters that matter to you. Today's topic: should child-age criminals be sentenced to life without parole? We'll learn why one Washington, D.C.-based organization says absolutely not. And my guest today is from that group. She is Heather Renwick of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. And thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Well, currently in the state of Nevada, 19 individuals are serving life sentences with no chance for parole. These individuals range from the age of 14 to 17. And today on Eye on Washington, we'll tell you what's happening in Washington and in the state to end life sentences without parole for children. We'll tell you about a bill from this Nevada state legislature that aims to abolish the practice. And we'll find out the brain development component of all this, which is my guest's top contention with the sentence. So in the past 8 years, 11 states have abolished life without parole for juveniles, and another 5 states have limited its use. Nevada, not among them. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that it's unconstitutional to impose a mandatory life without parole sentence on someone who was under the age of 18 at the time the crime was committed. Now, the court struck down statutes requiring a child to be sentenced to life terms. It said individuals need an individualized sentencing hearing where mitigating factors of youth are taken into consideration. In light of the court decision, those 11 states abolished life without parole for juveniles. Ms. Renwick, first of all, I want to welcome you to Eye on Washington. Thanks for being here today. I want to start with this. Is Nevada, or any state that is having these life sentences without parole for children, are they in violation of that 2012 ruling?
Yes, Nevada's current statutory scheme that allows for a mandatory sentence of life without parole for children is directly in violation of the United States Supreme Court's decision.
So to be clear, did the court strike down all statutes that allow a child to be sentenced to die in prison?
The court struck down the mandatory imposition of life without parole for children. So children are still able to be sentenced to life without parole, but before that sentence can be imposed, it's important and necessary for the judge or the jury to take into account all of who that child is and provide an individualized sentencing determination that may or may not result in life without parole.
So I read some of the court case information in that case. It was Miller versus Alabama. And in that 2012 case, 2 boys had been sentenced to life for crimes committed when they were 14. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Tell me about that case.
In those cases, both boys had been sentenced under a mandatory sentencing scheme in which the court had no discretion whatsoever to take into account that those boys were in fact boys. They were children who are capable of change over time. But because the court, the sentencer, did not have the opportunity to impose any other sentence, they were both sentenced to die in prison.
I've noticed that twice already you used the word scheme. Is that kind of how the campaign sees the way the courts have gotten around the decision and put these children in jail for life?
Well, by the use of scheme, I don't mean anything underhanded. I simply mean that is the framework in which the laws are operating.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So not necessarily negative, although the campaign does see it as a negative that this is occurring.
By scheme, I purely mean framework, legal framework.
But you do see it as a negative, obviously.
I do think that it's important that all states be consistent with the Supreme Court in Miller versus Alabama and afford an individualized sentencing determination for children.
Ms. Renwick, we're going to look at what's going on in Nevada a little bit later in this show, but someone on your staff mentioned to me just before our taping today that Nevada is among states that don't, quote, require the sentence, but use, quote, discretion when imposing the life term. So is using discretion, does that mean Nevada's violating the spirit or maybe even the letter of the Miller ruling?
The Miller ruling did allow for discretion in imposing juvenile life without parole sentences, but also required that in making that discretionary determination, that the court look to particular factors about who that child is. So that child's life circumstances, peer pressure, participation in the crime, the totality of who that child is. And so within a discretionary scheme like Nevada's, it's imperative that the court take into account all of those factors to be consistent with both the spirit and the letter of Miller.
Okay, well, when we come back, we're going to find out a lot more about what is happening in Nevada when we return. The Nevada State Legislature bill aimed at changing sentencing rules for juveniles. We're going to find out all about it right after this.
You're watching Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Brought to you by Caesars Entertainment, the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, Boyd Gaming, Rogich Communications Group, and by Jim Marsh Automotive.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Want more federal news that affects Nevada, its businesses, and its residents? Then you need to subscribe to Nevada's Washington Watch newsletter, your sole source of online news direct from Washington, D.C. Visit joycecommunications.com and subscribe today.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
And welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of efforts to stop the sentencing of juveniles to life without parole. My guest today is Heather Renwick of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. Well, let's focus this segment on what's happening in Nevada regarding all this. As we've shared, right now, Nevada law allows for a person under the age of 18 to be sentenced to life with no chance for parole. But a Nevada legislator has been working some time to change things. Legislation authored by Nevada Assembly Speaker John Hambrick would abolish life sentences without parole for juveniles in Nevada. It would allow for these juveniles to be eligible for parole after having served 15 years. And it would require that the individual's history as well as potential for rehabilitation be taken under consideration. Now, Ms. Renwick, there are 19 juveniles facing life without parole in Nevada, right?
That's correct.
However, before this taping, your organization told me that just as kids technically in prison are for life, the figure does not include those who have so-called de facto life sentences. What is meant by this word de facto?
A de facto life sentence is a sentence that's the functional equivalent of a life sentence. So it's a 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year sentence, which, in reality is sentencing a child to die in prison.
Because you could be 80 years old.
That's right.
By the time you get out, is that correct?
That's right.
So, we did hear from Speaker Hambrick's office before this taping, and he told Eye on Washington that he began his fight to end life without parole for kids. He says he feels no child should have the door shut on his or her future without the possibility of a second chance. And you and I talked some on set before this, and you said that the speaker has a strong faith in God, really, that you said led him to begin his fight. Is that correct?
That's right. I think many of our partners have a strong belief in the notion of redemption, and that all children have the capacity for change, and all children deserve a second chance at life.
Yeah, we also have this comment. He said, as a member of Nevada's Juvenile Justice Commission, he's seen far too many families and lives ripped apart because of the current law. Has that been your experience as well?
That has, yes.
Now, I know your organization's been to Nevada many times, and I know when this bill was really being fought hard before the legislature, I know your head, James Dole, was out there pushing hard for it. And so I know you've been there in general to advocate for the abolishment of life without parole for youth. What, in your estimation, is the support among Nevadans? What are you hearing? What are your discussions seeing?
I think we've seen that reforming the extreme sentencing practices for children has broad bipartisan support because it's just good policy. Children who make impulsive, terrible decisions are capable of growing into mature adults who deserve a second chance in the community. And by locking a kid up and throwing away the key, that means that child will be forever in the adult correction system, and we as taxpayers will pay to incarcerate that individual for the rest of his or her life, instead of assessing periodically whether that individual has matured to the point where he or she is safe to return to the community and can serve as a positive asset.
The Nevada bill, the child now would be eligible for parole after having served 15 years. Is that when you folk from the campaign sit down together, is 15 a good year? How do you decide for your own goals, just the campaign goals, never minding a certain state, never minding Nevada versus Illinois versus Maine, et cetera, et cetera? What's a good number,
15 years is reflective of, any child who commits any serious crime needs to be held accountable, absolutely. But within, after 15 years, it is reasonable to then reassess how that child has grown into an adult. Because if a 15-year-old is sentenced at the age of 30, presumably that 30-year-old is a very different person and a much more mature, responsible, remorseful person than he was at the age of 15.
And to be clear, that person might not be paroled. They are eligible for parole. They're coming before a parole board.
That is absolutely correct. This proposed law in Nevada does not ensure anybody's relief. It purely enables a periodic review so that an individual is able to demonstrate that growth and maturity. And it's for the parole board to make a public safety determination.
And speaking of growth and maturity, we're going to look at something related to that in our next segment. When we return, the juvenile brain. How does its rate of development fit into all this that we're talking about today? We're going to talk about it next. Stay with us.
Nevada's direct link to Capitol Hill. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, the only statewide Nevada news show based in Washington, D.C. All the top federal matters that matter most to Nevadans. Marilee talks with our congressional delegation and other leaders about the federal news you need to know. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce, Nevada's Eye on Capitol Hill.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
I never felt all that special. But in the wake of an earthquake, we can all do something. When donating goods, it's hard to know what's needed. So now it's my turn to help. Aid workers can spend me locally, or I can help save lives. Someone is doing better because of me. Together, we made that happen.
I got my own iPod Touch and used my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Having your child hospitalized can be a terrifying experience for any parent. In one moment, everything can change. Here at the Reno Ronald McDonald House, we can help. We keep families together when it matters the most by providing a home away from home for families with children in the hospital. Parents who stay at the Ronald McDonald House have more time with their children during the healing process. Please contact us today for more information and to see how you can help. Donate online at rmhc-reno.org.
And welcome back to Eye on Washington, our discussion of efforts to stop the sentencing of juveniles to life without parole. We've been visiting with Ms. Heather Renwick of the Washington, D.C.-based Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. A top contention among those who believe it's wrong to sentence a child to life without parole for crimes committed before the age of 18 is this. They claim that in a majority of cases, the brain of an individual under the age of 18 is significantly more underdeveloped than the brain of an adult. My Guess organization says that does not mean those kids are incapable of making good decisions, but does make them more susceptible to making poor choices, particularly if influenced by peer pressure. They cite neurobrain scanning imagery showing that youth under the age of 18 rely heavily on a more primitive part of the brain known as the amygdala as they make decisions. As time passes, a child's cognitive functions become more developed. Adults, on the other hand, rely on the prefrontal cortex for decision making. Here's what it says on the organization's website, quote, "We believe that young people convicted of serious crime should be held accountable for the harm they have caused in a way that reflects their capacity to grow and change." So, Ms. Renwick, you and your colleagues say you have research proving that youth still are developing both physically and emotionally, and that their brains are not fully mature. Is that correct?
That's right. There's a robust body of brain science research that's developed over the past 2 decades that shows that the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain, as you mentioned, that is responsible for the executive functioning of the brain. So it's our ability to decide between good and bad and to understand consequences of our actions. That part of the brain actually isn't fully developed until our mid-20s. And I think that's consistent with what we know from life experience, which is that teenagers tend to make impulsive, reckless decisions based on the immediate stimuli in their immediate surroundings, as opposed to thinking long term about, what their decisions will impact. Their decisions will have several years down the road.
Speaker Hambrick told Eye on Washington before this show, he said, quote, "Youngsters don't think like adults, shouldn't be punished like adults." So is that sort of what you're saying
right.
here?
Yes.
I do want to play devil's advocate here. I think that of the 19 in Nevada,
yes,
serving, I don't know if you have statistics on what crimes were committed or only the number of children. In general, if a child, steals a candy bar versus a child who commits murder, I understand what you're saying about the differences between brain development. I'm going to ask you about a different kind of difference. If a child is 14 and kills someone versus if a child is 17 and 3 days away from being, quote, an adult at age 18, Is there a difference on whether it's quote unquote fair or not fair for a child to be put away for life? Because if he was 18, the kid would be put away, or the individual would be put away for life. How do you say it's okay at 17 and a half versus 13? Do you see what I'm saying? There are going to be people in my audience, and we're on statewide in Nevada. Some are saying this person murdered someone, life without parole. And some are going to say, oh, he was so young. How do you make that decision?
Right.
What say you?
Well, 18 certainly isn't a magic number. It's not that you're 17 and 364 days and you're a child, and you turn 18 and you're magically an adult. All societies have to draw lines. You're allowed to vote at 18 and not 17. That doesn't mean at 18 you're magically, an extremely well-informed voter. Sure. But we draw a line at 18. I do think that, as the younger the child, the harder it is to attribute adult culpability. So I do think there's a difference between a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old, but certainly 19-year-olds are still in the process of growing and developing. And just because they make terrible decisions that result in extreme harm as a teenager does not mean that reckless, impulsive, violent behavior will continue into adulthood. And in fact, we see that most teenagers who commit even violent crimes grow out of that behavior as they mature into adulthood. And
maybe that's why Speaker Hambrick and others are at least saying, let's take a look at 15 years.
That's exactly
15
right.
years later. Okay, thanks. When we return, what does Heather Renwick say the federal government should be doing regarding all this? And where does the Nevada delegation stand on it? Let's find out right after this.
All of us at Caesars Entertainment have something we want to say.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
We don't want you to gamble if you've had too much to drink.
You shouldn't gamble if you're lonely or depressed.
And if you're under 21, you're not allowed to play.
No.
No matter which of our casinos you come to, our message is always the same.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly.
Play responsibly. We know you're coming to our casinos to have a good time, and we always want you to leave feeling like you did.
Nevada's direct link to Capitol Hill. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. The only statewide Nevada news show based in Washington, D.C. All the top federal matters that matter most to Nevadans. Marilee talks with our congressional delegation and other leaders about the federal news you need to know. Eye on Washington with Marilee Joyce. Nevada's Eye on Capitol Hill.
I got my own iPod Touch and use my dad's login to get on gambling sites. Poker is the best, but I'm losing a lot. Since I'm too young to play, they're not allowed to keep the money and my dad won't find out. That's right, isn't it?
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls. But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you guys know statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected.
Help Nevada Humane Society save the lives of orphan kittens by becoming a foster care volunteer. Over 2,000 kittens a year need temporary care.
These kittens need food and personal attention until they're old enough for adoption. Foster care is fun, rewarding, and truly saves lives.
I love fostering. I have fostered almost 50 kittens so far, and it is so rewarding.
If you can foster kittens for a few weeks, we can find them homes for life. To learn how you can become a foster care volunteer, call or visit Nevada Humane Society.
Want more federal news that affects Nevada, its businesses, and its residents? Then you need to subscribe to Nevada's Washington Watch newsletter, your sole source of online news direct from Washington, D.C. Visit joycecommunications.com and subscribe today.
And welcome back to our closing segment of today's Eye on Washington, our look at national and state efforts to stop the life sentencing of juveniles. My guest today has been Ms. Heather Renwick of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. So what is this campaign all about? It's a DC-based national coalition that lobbies for what it calls fair and age-appropriate sentences for juveniles. It's focused on abolishing life without parole for youth. They work to educate decision makers and the broader public about the issue on both the federal and state level. They assist with strategic communications, litigation, and advocacy to attorneys, advocates, organizers, and others. They provide facts, stories, and research on the impact these sentences have on individuals, families, and communities. And they help facilitate relationships between families of incarcerated youth with families of victims. And, you know, Ms. Renwick, I think that last point really needs some emphasis today before we stop today's show. There must be incredible pain for both sides, for both sets of parents, some sorrow and anger on the part of the victim's family. What have you experienced during your meetings with the two sides of the families?
I think it's incredibly important that all voices are represented in discussions about fair sentencing for children, in particular the voices of victims' family members and the parents and loved ones of individuals serving, because in both circumstances, lives have been torn apart, terrible harm has been caused, and there's, I think, oftentimes commonality amongst the family members on both sides who are both experiencing that pain and loss.
Quickly, what's the role of our federal leaders in all this? What's the Nevada delegation's role as far as backing or at least looking at being educated on the issue in Nevada? What do you want to see from the Obama administration? What are you hoping to see from federal leaders in the rest of 2015 and beyond?
Well, the United States is the only country in the world that sentences children to die in prison. We are the only country that sentences kids to life without parole. And so we are hopeful that the federal government sets the standard to bring us into compliance with the rest of the world for age-appropriate sentencing.
Okay. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Hope to see you again. That does wrap it up for this week's Eye on Washington. I hope you'll join us next time as we discuss more important federal matters and their impact on you in Nevada. For news anytime on how federal issues affect you, visit our website. It's joycecommunications.com. While you're there, like us on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and check out YouTube for any of our shows that you have missed. I'm Marilee Joyce in Washington, D.C. Have a great day today.